ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula says the party is still awaiting a response from former President Jacob Zuma on his suspension. The letter was issued on Monday following a National Executive Committee meeting over the weekend. Mbalula said the letter of suspension was guided by the ANC Constitution. For more on this conversation, we're now joined by political analyst Sandile Swana. Mr. Swana, thank you so much for joining us on Newzroom Afrika tonight. It seems mum is the word coming from the former president of the ANC to his own political home.
Yes. The General Secretary, the Secretary General, of the African National Congress, Fikile Mbalula, did say that their, suspension of former President Jacob Zuma was based on clause 25.60 of their constitution, and it was based on justifiable exceptional circumstances that they issue a suspension that is with immediate effect, regardless of whether he responds or does not respond. And if you were to respond, you would have to respond, within 48 hours. And even if it does not respond, clause 25.60 in any case says that if the suspension has been made in public, it's enough notice. So he's effectively suspended whether he answers or does not answer.
Is that non-response to the ANC by Mr. Zuma a message in itself, if he has 48 hours to respond to this organization that he's been a part of for his entire life, and then he chooses to completely and blatantly ignore it? Be that as it may, that the suspension still holds, but what do we make of that attitude towards the ANC by Mr. Zuma?
The attitude of Mr. Zuma towards the ANC, as he calls it, the ANC of Cyril Ramaphosa, is that the people who are running the ANC at the present time, the NEC that is purporting to suspend him, as well as the top 7, if you like, are actually criminals, so he has no time for them. So, and in fact, the party, Umkhonto weSizwe Party, part of this job is to reclaim the ANC from what he calls the thugs that are running the ANC or who have hijacked the ANC.
The irony of it is that most of those NEC members are the same NEC members who were part of that party while he was heading it. So when did they suddenly now become criminals to Mr. Zuma?
Not to say that he was not part of the criminality himself, by the way. And if he says Ramaphosa is leading a gang of criminals, Ramaphosa was his second in command and also in charge of the deployment committee, deploying those very thugs that Zuma is complaining about. The issue of the ANC being hijacked by political gangsters, and where the people who are running the ANC, including Zuma, by the way, do not have actually the DNA of the ANC anymore. They are non-ANC. I mean, in one assessment of this, in 2005 already, Thabo Mbeki made an assessment in one Lekgotla in Parliament of this. So Zuma would certainly be part. So this is gang warfare. It's one gang of criminals fighting another gang.
And when we look at the behavior that former President Jacob Zuma has displayed over the past couple of months, openly campaigning for an opposition party, a new opposition party, the MK party, criticizing the IEC, criticizing his former political home. Well, it still is his political home. How would you say the ANC has dealt with this? Did they deal with it quick enough? Did they nip this in the bud?
I don't think this was something that could be nipped in the bud. because the nipping of it in the bud, strictly speaking, would have been to say there are issues that Zuma would have wanted to negotiate, issues of him and his partners being pardoned or condoned in a number of things. For instance, that the ANC would have agreed not to vote for the removal of impeachment of Judge Hlophe or Khwebane and others, and so on and so forth. So information that we have is that by April, at the earliest time, say by April, the ANC was already aware that there is this move that is afoot of registering this Mkhonto party. As to whether they were aware whether Zuma was already part of it, we are not sure. But there was no aggressive step that could be taken. Even this step that has been taken to suspend him on the basis of clause 25.60 is a prudent step, not to start open gang warfare in the streets of South Africa like the ANC did, or some of its members did, in July 2021. The insurrection that Ramaphosa called. It was an inside job of insurrection of ANC members revolting against a sitting president of the Republic of South Africa.
So considering that uprising that we saw as well in 2021, considering the support that we see for the former president as well, this is most likely going to also taint the ANC at the polls, would you say?
Yeah, so this is really one of the worst things that the people of the ANC could have done. It's in the sense that at this time, we see a lot of their senior members being Thabo Mbeki himself saying he cannot campaign for a party which is at times represented by criminals. We've seen Mavuso Msimang, one of the most senior members of the ANC, resigning and then rejoining on the basis of the criminality that is going on inside the ANC. We've seen Murphy Murobe of the UDF starting another party with Jardine, Roger Jardine, and then Zuma himself. So the ANC at the highest level of leadership is totally divided and actually setting up parties as we speak that are competing with the ANC.
And while the former president of the ANC, Jacob Zuma, hasn't responded to them as yet, what we do know is that he has been very vocal in the last couple of months as well, particularly when it comes to the elections and campaigning and, of course, the new MK party as well. That being said, do you think that the ANC will be forced at some point to have to expel him? Will the suspension be enough? Because if we had to take a look at his track record, he's most likely going to continue criticizing and tarnishing the brand of his political home.
No, there's no need to take any rushed step to terminate Zuma's membership in the ANC. The constitution of the ANC says they must give him his charge sheet within 30 days. That is clause 25.65, I think. So that is all the obligation that they have. Given that he himself, Zuma, is busy with elections, and they are also busy with elections, my suspicion is that they will put it there, end it there, and then continue with it after the elections. But now remember that after the elections, the ANC is going to be looking for coalition partners. What may interest you is that they may actually have to include Zuma and MK in their coalition after the elections.
Do you think that is something that the ANC, I'm sorry to interject you there, do you think that is something that the ANC is bearing in mind and being very cautious about how they handle this matter, considering the fact that after these elections, coalitions will be the buzzword?
They are very aware of that. And if ever they were not clear that they are going for a coalition, Zuma has made that clear. You'll remember that when they could not win Durban, eThekwini Metro, they didn't have numbers to win it. it was made clear that if they could talk to Zuma, Zuma could talk to people who can make a coalition for the ANC. And Zuma did exactly that. So when they finish losing the election this year in 2024, Zuma may well be one of the people, major people who are going to help them to participate in government. In the alternative being for them to go and partner with the DA, which has got its own ramifications.
So would you say it's fair to say that their former president has kind of put them between a rock and a hard place? It sounds like a bit of a catch-22.
No, they are between a rock and a hard place. I think that, as you have been obviously observing the news, when they started, they tried to play down this as if there's nothing. They're just going to be calm and continue campaigning, this, that, and the other. But as the days progressed, it became clear that it was clear to them that Zuma is going to take a big chunk of their votes, which is just a fact on the table. MK and Zuma are going to take a chunk of the votes of the ANC, and you have to then plan your strategy, post-election strategy, around that issue. So that is where they are now. They are playing cautiously. They have to play cautiously relative to the EFF. All these other people that have been expelling to the ANC, they are now, from the ANC, they are now going to have to negotiate with those people to be able to have some form of power after this election. The alternative being that they partner with the DA.
Welcome back. We're still in conversation with political analyst Sandile Swana on that discussion about the ANC suspension of its former president, Jacob Zuma. Now, Mr. Swana, before the break, you were talking about how the ANC is playing it cautiously. And while they're playing it cautiously, what we're seeing is that Jacob Zuma is not playing it cautiously. He's not mincing his words. What does the suspension mean in terms of that? Does this mean he can continue unabated and continue to criticize the African National Congress through until the elections and possibly even beyond?
Remember that when you are suspended from participating in the activities of the ANC. The only activity that you can participate in, that you are allowed to participate in when you are suspended, is the disciplinary hearing. So when Zuma is participating in the activities of Umkhonto weSizwe Party and politics in general, he is not participating in the activities of the ANC. So the ANC does not have to say anything or do anything within its internal processes about that, because he is not capable of participating in the activities of the ANC. So that criticism could be equivalent to a criticism issued by any other political commentator or any political party member who is not in the ANC, because his membership is not in operation except within that cocoon of the disciplinary process.
Taking a look at this matter, Mr. Swana, who would you say has got the upper hand at this point between the ANC and its former leader?
You see, I would say Zuma has got the upper hand in the sense that I would compare this intervention by Jacob Zuma as a cat amongst the pigeons. So when you throw a cat amongst the pigeons and you ask who seems to have the upper hand, clearly the cat, although it may be one cat and there may be 100 pigeons, the pigeons will be in a very difficult position. And that is the position of the ANC at this point in time.
And considering that, would then it be advisable for there to be talks of a disciplinary hearing of sort? And are there plans post the suspension of the ANC to discipline its former president, Jacob Zuma?
They may well be, but I think you must, or something that I may not have mentioned quite clearly here, is that you must remember that among the people, senior members of the ANC who are remaining and who may not even want to join that Umkhonto weSizwe party, there are Zuma supporters there, and there are Zuma sympathizers there. And their sympathy is legitimate because many members of the ANC have not been treated fairly. The discipline and many other things in the ANC are never handled with an even hand. So many people have been ill-treated. And if Zuma has got complaints, it is quite likely that those complaints are legitimate. So he has got sympathizers there. So you have the actual outright supporters of Zuma who are now in MK, and then inside you still have supporters of Zuma inside there, or supporters of people who have been treated like Zuma, if you like, including Zuma, which is why you found that it took them so long to debate this issue, to know what to do about it. And when they did, they came with a very moderate and considered and measured approach, this one of this temporary suspension.
You know, the fractures of the factions of the ANC are not new to us. We've been seeing this year on year. But would you say that it's reaching a point where it's untenable for the governing party?
Yes, I think that, you know, some of us had said there must be an expulsion of some of the elements, especially the criminal and corrupt elements who are there really to do for private benefit. I wouldn't have easily guessed that that phenomenon will happen in the manner that it is happening, where a former state president and a former president of the ANC forms a competing party with the ANC and then declares that he wants to rescue the ANC from the criminals. And he's correct in saying that. The criminals who are running the ANC. It's actually a fiasco from the perspective of the voters. Going into the market with such a clear schism. I don't know, it's going to be very tough. Very, very tough. This is very tough.
And speaking of this fiasco that you make mention of, what kind of ANC is going into this elections? Is this ANC fractured and limping when you consider its internal squabbles, when you consider, yes, of course, the MK party, but there's a whole host of new political parties that are being launched almost on a weekly basis now?
Yes. What is happening is that by 2004, the ANC had gotten about 69.69%, almost 70% of the vote, meaning that South Africans were prepared to leave whatever parties they were in and entrust, especially black South Africans, the people of non-European extraction, that they could outsource their political duties to the ANC. And once this fracturing started happening with Zuma leading it, by the way, from 2005, the votes of the ANC started declining. And these steps that they are taking now, Zuma again being prominent in dividing the ANC. Rightly so, because these are criminal gangs, by and large. Because there's no honesty. In other words, there's no honesty. There'll always be dissatisfaction because nothing is done fairly, nothing is done with honesty. So they are going into the voting market as fractions. And in the process of that, South Africans are saying, look, just like we are doing with load shedding, I might as well go and buy my own solar power system. I might as well go and buy my own inverters. It's every man for himself and God for all of us. So these new parties that are coming up is people saying we cannot outsource our political duties to the ANC. Let's rather form parties, boutique parties, that are going to look after our own interests better than that big group of the ANC, which is fracturing and is in fact a continuing criminal enterprise.
And while the election date has not been announced yet, we do know that it would be quite imminent. What would you advise the ANC to do to redeem itself? And is it possible at this point, with us reaching that 11th hour for it to redeem itself?
No. You see, the ANC, you know, when we were university students, and obviously subsequent to that we've had children at university, there was what is called a year mark, or what was called a GP, a group performance. So if 30 days before the exam, your marks, your aggregate marks are 20%, you were usually advised to go home because you are not fit to write the exam. The ANC is in that position of that student who has a GP of about 20%. They have absolutely nothing in their hands that they can do. And this is the reason. The reason is that this loss of votes that the ANC has suffered, starting with the 2009 election, was based on decreasing performance. The performance started declining, and dishonesty of the ANC and criminality and corruption of the ANC started becoming more prominent after the 2007 conference of the ANC. And at every election, they started losing votes until they started losing the metros, one after the other. And they nearly lost Gauteng. In the fiasco of the 2007-2005 fiasco, the Polokwane conference, they lost Cape Town with that, in those squabbles. It was internal squabbles of the ANC that caused them to lose the Western Cape, called Cape Town, the Western Cape. So there's nothing they can do because the voters have load shedding. You cannot solve load shedding. You cannot solve water shedding. You cannot solve investment shedding. You cannot solve job shedding that is already at full steam. The long-term unemployment level is 3 times what it was in 1994. And everywhere you read, you see the statistics have gotten worse. The educational levels of the colored communities, the so-called colored communities, and the African communities are worse than what they were. Tertiary education levels are worse than what they were in 1994. So the situation is very bad, and it cannot be solved in the next 4 months or whatever you want to call it, the period that is remaining.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on Newzroom Africa and for your insights tonight. That was political analyst Sandile Swana.